joining us. I am Samuele Dumioni. I am a researcher at the Security and Technology Program at the United Nations Institute for the Disarmament Research. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this multi-stakeholder dialogue on internet fragmentation and cybersecurity. So for those of you who may don't know much about UNIDIR, we are an autonomous institute within the United Nations with the mandate to conduct independent research on disarmament and related international security issues. This event is part of a broader research project that I am leading, funded by the European Union on internet fragmentation. And as you may know, internet fragmentation is a contested concept that may have different interpretation according to the nature of the stakeholder. And today we will tackle this issue from a specific perspective that I'm going to introduce you in a second, which is nevertheless contextualized in the current discussion on internet fragmentation. The aim is really to try to unpack this broad topic, grasping the essential elements and feed the knowledge into a report that will be published later this year. So internet fragmentation is a recurrent, if not constant, hot topic when it comes to discussions about the state of the internet, and has many implications for a broad variety of issues, including that goes beyond internet itself and or digital development. It goes well beyond, and it has impact on human development, human rights, sustainable economic growth, just to mention a few. At UNIDIR, we are looking at the issue of internet fragmentation from an international security perspective. As a matter of fact, the promotion of an open, secure, stable, accessible, and peaceful ICT environment is a recurrent objective in the multilateral processes relating to international and ICT security that are taking place at the United Nations. For example, the final report of the first open-ended working group in the field of information telecommunication in the context of international security, otherwise known also as AOWG, recall that the UWG itself represents a significant milestone in international cooperation towards an open, secure, stable, accessible, and peaceful ICT environment. However, trends are quite worrisome, as a growing number of states and other stakeholders are raising concerns over the fragmentation of the ICT environment, and more specifically of the internet. I would like to recall that in May, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres published a policy brief with this vision on digital governance ahead of next year's Summit of the Future. In this document, he highlighted how open, safe, and secure use of the internet is slipping away from us, potentially permanently. Moreover, last week at the Internet Governance Forum, the issue of the internet fragmentation and how to avoid it featured quite often in panels and discussions that took place in Kyoto. So it's clear that the internet fragmentation has become an increasingly serious possibility, which is already occurring in certain settings. And indeed, the fragmentation of the internet can affect different and sometimes intertwined levels, including the political, commercial, and the technological one. Considering that this research project, the one that we are doing at UNIDIR, focuses on cybersecurity impact of internet fragmentation, the event today centers around the analysis of the technical dimension of it. And this is the level where we find the technical infrastructures, protocols, standards that underpin the network of the networks, as is often referred to the internet. Among these, there are critical components that guarantee the interoperability of networks and devices, including naming and numbering systems, internet exchange points, and transmissions media. As a matter of fact, the internet can function as an open public good because of several technical infrastructures and properties that allows for communication and exchange of information regardless of where you are, who you are, and through which devices you are connecting to the internet. Of course, the consequence of internet fragmentation can be different and can relate to a variety of aspects, including user experiences, privacy issues, and business practices. But as I mentioned today, we will look at what are the consequences of internet fragmentation on cybersecurity, broadly understood. And we realize that this aspect is often unexplored when it comes to discussion on internet fragmentation, but yet is essential for the maintenance of a stable and peaceful ICT environment. For example, cyber incidents often portray a transnational dimension affecting governments, businesses, and users in many different regions of the world. And addressing some of these transnational incidents can be very challenging, especially if the multi-stakeholder community that responds to such incidents work in a fragmented ICT environment. To unpack these complex issues, I'm joined here today by great experts and practitioners coming from the non-state actor community of the multi-stakeholder group that works and deals with internet and cybersecurity. And so it's my pleasure to introduce you to Alison Menkin, Director of DNS Services at Packet Clearinghouse, which is the international organization responsible for providing operational support and security to critical internet infrastructure and the core of the domain name system. Welcome, Alison. Nice to see you here. Then we have Benjamin Hang, Head Center of Excellence for National Security and Future Issues in Technology at the Rajaratnam School for International Studies. Thank you very much, Benjamin, for being here. It's a pleasure to see you again. And then Alan Duran, Distinguished Technologies at the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, otherwise called as ICANN. And Jaya Balu from Rapid7 was supposed to join. I don't know if she managed to connect. It doesn't seem so. In any case, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And before start, I would like to just remind a couple of housekeeping rules. The meeting is recorded and will be made available on UNIDIR channels. And at the end of this roundtable, we will also have a Q&A session, and I invite attendees who wish to ask questions to write in the chat or to raise their virtual hand, and we will make sure to give the floor as soon as possible. So I don't want to take the stage anymore. I don't want to keep it, so I'm ready to start off this roundtable by asking a very simple, but at the same time can be complex questions in terms of internet fragmentation. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, different stakeholders might have a different understanding of internet fragmentation. So before dive deep into this topic, I would really like to ask you, what is your understanding of internet fragmentation? So I give you now the floor to each of you. We do a first round table, and then we can continue with the following question. Alison, would you like to kick us off?
Oh, thank you. Sure. So I think that the first thing to ask is, what do we think the unfragmented internet is? And for those of us who've been working in the internet for since the beginning, the current internet does not look like the unfragmented internet that we expected. It does not connect everybody end to end with no barriers, which was one of the original principles of the internet. On the other hand, it somehow provides people with all the great benefits in terms of security and national security and economic growth and all the other things, despite the fact that it contains a number of barriers. So for example, now there are always protective security facilities around any given set of systems, so that a malefactor cannot reach you. And actually, that's a good thing, but it was not one of the original principles. Now there are always, there are very often network address translators. So instead of having a single unified numbering system, we have a numbering system that requires translations, and that works despite much skepticism on the part of people early on when that architecture was first proposed. I'm actually somebody who would like to see us have more of the IPv6 and coherent numbering throughout the internet, but that is, there are trends in the opposite direction, which we'll be talking about. Now we often have intermediate organizations or collectors who steer our traffic or censor our traffic. And that is a fragmentation issue that is not, that is very widespread, and that is very difficult for us to talk about as infrastructure people, but there are some standards efforts about that as well. The most basic form of internet fragmentation that I think we can talk about in this particular panel are the situations where you can't, even if there are no other obstacles, you cannot reach systems that you have resources that you need to reach because of all the reasons that you're using the internet. And critical ones there are then when the DNS is purposely inconsistent, the naming system that we use, the domain name system, so that it's not possible for users to, and there are other barriers put in place so that organizations and users cannot find a name and get a correct name that they could connect to. Somehow reach the resources that, and I use this word somehow because there's all these other obstacles, but basically it's important to have a consistent set of names. And then very important, and something that was known from the very beginning of the internet, is that there's a consistent and global routing infrastructure that is maintains the core of the internet and all the different tributaries where people are reaching the internet from. And when that is affected by deliberately or by non-development of good practices, that is probably the biggest contributor in the future to internet fragmentation that we would worry about at the infrastructure level. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alison. If I may follow up with one question that then I also would like to ask to all the other panelists. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most fragmentation possible, meaning networks that cannot interact to each other, and 1 being, as you mentioned, the internet as it was when it was born, with the set of principles that may not be applicable anymore. Where would you position the current state of art in terms of fragmentation?
That's very difficult, but if we think of it as those pain indicators, so how much pain do we have? You know, that's kind of thing where they have a smiley face for you're not having much pain, and a frowning face, and increasingly worse. I think that for much of the internet, somehow it is possible to have an unfragmented communication. But we're going to talk about trends, and there are trends, and there are parts of the internet where the forces of fragmentation are worse. So you could think of it as, you know, I can deal with it, but I have severe pain in part of myself. And we're not yet at the point where everything is in pain, but it would not be, we will need to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Thank you. Pretty clear. Thank you very much, Alison. Alan, would you give us your understanding of internet fragmentation?
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. there are different concepts of internet fragmentation. There's really some that are very germane to this panel and some that are further away. I would like to distinguish at least 3 kinds of fragmentation to really focus on the last one. Sometimes we talked about content, content that is maybe not accessible because it's filtered, and people look at this as fragmentation. Other people, in some cases, look at this as parental control. And it's exactly the same tool that we can use within a household to make sure that my children don't go to some places I don't want them to go, but are used at a larger scale by some countries, some regions that are trying to do more control on what is accessible and what is not. So this is not technical fragmentation. This is at a layer above that. What is also not technical fragmentation could be, it's an hypothetic, a decision by some regions, some governments, national countries to separate from what is currently the internet today. Today, the internet is simply a collection of things that decide to work together. Nothing prevents from any party to separate from this and to have its own life. So far, it seems that everybody has an understanding that the value of being together is much higher than the value of being separate. But again, this is not technical. This is simply a decision by service providers, countries to separate or to stay together. When we talk at the technical layer, what really matters in my perspective is that any content that you have authorization to access to be accessed from anywhere you are, from any device that you may have. And the key point is that content that you are authorized to access to. So this is essentially this vision of one world, one internet. So Alison earlier was talking about the end-to-end principle. Things have evolved a lot since then. And we have learned how to bridge things together. It's not ideal, but it works. However, there is a layer that would be a lot more complicated if it were to not be unique anymore. It's what we call the namespace, a set of domain names that we are using. There were attempts about 20-something years ago at what we call alternate routes. They didn't really go too far, but there were attempts to somehow fragment things. We see some of that now with some of the new technologies being proposed in this area of technology, but have a potential to simply say that a name is not unique anymore. It could mean something somewhere in one universe and mean something else in another universe. And that will be a major problem. So to answer your question about where are we now between the happy space and the disaster, I remember this story. It was meant as a joke, but I think it has some value, about the guy who falls from the Empire State Building. And at every window that he's going through, people are asking him, "Are you okay?" And he says, "So far, so good. So far, so good." It's only when you crash that you have a real problem. And that's the same thing with the internet. We may not realize that because everything seems to be working, but at some point things will not.
Thank you, Alan. Very kind of graphic, the image of where we are going in terms of internet fragmentation. Thank you for your thoughts, and also thank you for pointing out to certain trends. We will come back to trends in a bit. Now I would like to give the floor to Benjamin and listening to your understanding of internet fragmentation. You are coming from academia. Maybe you also have a slightly different understanding. I'm not sure. I don't want to anticipate anything. I'll leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Samuel. Just we were having that conversation right the other day. I'm actually coming in from an academic and policy space, so not from the computer science and engineering space, and that's where a lot of fragmentation is happening. And so as I was saying before the whole thing started, I'm very happy to be able to learn from the experts like Alison and Alan, because I mean, really, the time that I spent as a network manager back in the day, you know, internet fragmentation was not an issue back in the 90s, but now can definitely see that concerns. And being in the policy space, I'm very conscious of trying to explain this to policymakers. And so I try to put it on a slide, which hopefully makes sense. Like this, right? And I was looking at the current definitions that are available, like the WEF definitions. There's technical, there's governmental, and commercial. So governmental is when different countries say that we want to limit access to certain things, or we want to have different systems for certain things. And commercial is when companies are making that decision. So if I am connecting to the internet through free internet by Facebook, then I can only get to the sites that Facebook allows me to see. Or if I want to go anywhere else, I'm going to have to pay. So the IGF's own definitions of user experience and technical and governance seem to have some overlap with this. I think the user experience does make me think of what Alison was saying, that you sometimes you can get to something, but you're going to go through some amount of pain to get it. So I looked at the 7 layers OSI model, and based on what I could figure out, please correct me. I'm very glad to have experts here to be able to correct me if I'm getting this wrong. But as far as I understood, the fragmentation layers are, if at the physical level, you're talking about choosing to use different physical elements like different cables. At a data link level, you're talking about using different, for example, 5G infrastructure to do your data link. And at the number 3, the network level, you're thinking of doing different IXPs, for example. Number 4, the transport level, some systems might be on IPv4, some may be on IPv6, some might even want to go into new IP. Number 5 is the session layer. I couldn't find anything on that. Number 6, the presentation layer, different forms of encryption. And 7, the application layer, where there are differences in content blocking, as an example. And that's where the shall we say, the governance and the commercial seems to have the greatest impact. Because on the governmental side, there are certain governments that say, okay, my society is... so some societies say, we want to have all kinds of conversation are allowed. You can say bad things about another person's religion, about their gender, about their beliefs, about their race, and it's totally okay because in this culture we believe it's right to do so. But in other cultures, say no, we don't want to be able to say bad things about a person's gender, about a person's race, about a person's beliefs. So we are not allowing that content on. So there's a governmental decision to block content. Or in some cases, a commercial decision that some corporations say, because this kind of content is bad for my business, I will only have the content that's good for my business and will get more people to continue to log in and to see advertisements and gain revenue. So that's the kind of fragmentation that I'm looking at. And even on the other layers, choosing that become governmental decisions to use different, for example, on the data link level, to use different 5G infrastructure because I don't trust the other country's provider to provide me the data link level. So I want to find my own, so that there's 2 different data link level. Or I don't want to use that country's cables because I don't trust them. I want to have my own cables for my own safety, so I have my own cables. So that to me is what I perceive from my space in the policy space. And happy to also be corrected if I've gotten any of this wrong.
Thank you, Benjamin. And so, in case, if you want to again put like on a scale of 1 to 10 internet fragmentation, what would be your assessment?
I like Alson's thing of using the emojis, and I go by the it's a kind of like half happy, half sad kind of thing. That we can. There's a lot of interconnectivity still happening, even in countries where there's great firewalls. You can actually still communicate easily with the people in that country through the internet because there is connectivity. You can email them, you can message them through shared platforms.
Yes. Also, if we take the layers that you showed up in the slides, or even like the different definitions of internet fragmentation and how they are unpacked by different stakeholders, I guess we can at the same time find different scales of fragmentation according to what kind of layer or level we are looking at. Probably at the technological level, we do have a certain degree of fragmentation, whereas when it comes to the user experience, that might be something more fragmented according to where we are in the world. So thank you all for the first round of questions and for giving me a first understanding of internet fragmentation. We mentioned some trends in the previous answers, so I would like to keep exploring the topic of the trends. Also because we learned that conversation and discussion on internet fragmentation have been quite constant and recurrent, so it's something that covers and spans throughout times. So what are the current trends or the more worrisome that you would identify at the technical level from your standpoint? Maybe Alain, you can give us like your first thoughts. Thanks.
So I would like to go back to this notion of a namespace, because I think that's an aspect of technology that underpins the internet that is the most at risk today. If you look at the OSI layer, this doesn't really fit neatly into the OSI layer. It's kind of parallel to that. At the IP layer, which is really layer 3, we have learned how to make the internet work with different protocols. And 20-something, 30 years ago when I started, we had 4, 5, 6 different protocols. And then it all for some winnowed down to just TCP/IP and IPv4. And then we had IPv6 in parallel. And Alison was talking about the early days of IPv6 when we were hoping this thing will be deployed globally, universal deployment of IPv6, which unfortunately didn't happen at the speed we wanted. And now we are living in a world where we have IPv4 and IPv6, but overall we have been learning how to live with that, and things still connect through network address translation, through bridges, gateways, but they still work. When I type a name somewhere, like www.unidir.org, for example, or the UN, I'm not sure which one you are using, you will arrive to your website. Now, imagine a world where when you type this thing, depending on where you are, you go to one place or to another. Imagine even worse than that. In my house, I have a fiber connection. I'm very lucky, I live in the mountain, but I still have fiber. And I have a 4G connection. And depending on where I am in the house, I can get a better signal on one or on the other. So sometimes I hook up with one provider, sometimes I hook up with another provider. Now imagine that depending on which provider I am using, meaning depending on which place I am in the house, I go to one place or I go to another. This will be extraordinarily chaotic. This will be a very difficult thing to debug for the service providers, for the support people and operating system vendors and things. And that may be a world where we are heading if we do not pay attention to the unicity of a namespace. Now, there are new technologies that have been showing up recently, and I was talking about alternative naming systems, sometimes based on blockchain, but not necessarily. There are other things not based on blockchain that have been proposing new names. And those names are being allocated without any coordination whatsoever either between themselves, between those different new systems, or between those systems and what we use on the internet. And that has a potential to create a huge amount of chaos. Because again, depending on which of those names I am going to use, depending on where I am in my house, which service provider I'm going to use, which one of those systems is going to be queried first, I may get to different points on the internet. This to me is the most important current threat that we are facing.
Thank you, Alain. So, do you see this already somehow happening, or it's a kind of gloomy forecast?
No, it's already happening.
It's already happening.
Yes,
We're
for
already,
example, the name wallet is already shared by at least 2 or 3 of those alternative naming systems. So depending on how you do your resolutions, which one you query first, which browser you are using, which part of the house you are, these names ending in .wallet are completely different. So this is not simply doom and gloom. This is actually happening. This is happening at a relatively small scale, but this is already happening. So now is the time to pay attention.
So it's happening with the development of the new kind of internet, the W3, using the blockchain, or is something that is happening already in the current kind of Web 2.0 that we have?
I'm not sure what Web 3.0 means, to be very honest with you. So I have heard a couple of days ago about Web 4.0, and I can certainly create Web 5.0 tomorrow on a napkin. So those things, to me, do not mean much. What matters is there's an application somewhere, and this application is somehow translating a name into something they want to access, being on interplanetary domain file systems or being on the World Wide Web as we know today. Doesn't really matter. The question is, you have a name and you want to access it. So
thank you, Alain. Very, very clear, even if quite worrisome. Before turning the question to the other panelists, I see Jaya connected. I don't know if she's with us. Jaya, can you hear it? Can you hear me? I saw her appearing on the screen. Maybe she has some technical issues. We will come back to her. Hopefully she can manage to connect. I'm asking my colleague Wenting if she can assist her in connecting. And meanwhile, Alison, we heard about these worrisome trends when it comes to the name system. What is your understanding of other or similar trends, worrisome trends that you see at the technical level?
I'm going to include those that Alain has mentioned, because I think those are highly valid concerns, and then talk about a trend that I think is very concerning, which also has big cyber implications, which is the push towards breaking up global standards. So just as we need unique names, and they're dictated by several organizations that do coordination and create the standards for handling them, and have done for a long time. We also have unique standards for the numbers, for the assignment of numbers for global reachability, and for routing and routing security, the ability to, having found what the routing address is for a certain name, to get there and get there safely and securely. And there's a tremendous amount of energy going into making the global routing system more secure than it had been in the past. If you don't use secure BGP, there's a possibility for your organization or for you as an individual to have have no access, or to have your access be going through areas where it's easier for people to manipulate your traffic. The steps for getting secure BGP, more and more organizations are finding they need to do that because they have encountered a cyber attack that was related to that problem. But we can't get there with something that's that global and that universal without having an agreement that we will work on these standards together in certain and get unique standards. So uniqueness of names, uniqueness of numbers, uniqueness of standards for working with them. And there are of course, many different layers of unique standards, and we can work around them. So for example, Benjamin, you mentioned new IP. New IP would require more gateways to go up in order to make sure that it was possible to go between the global internet and those who are using different, maybe even the same addresses, but with different structures of what used to be the global protocol, the IP protocol. But we've addressed these things many times before. However, if we cannot have global routing and consistent naming, and we don't have a unique way to make the standards and best practices for that, it won't be possible to sustain a network that works as well as it does, which we've all said is it mostly works. It's mostly alive and good, but it will plummet us into a situation where there is not a global internet without the standards being there. So that trend is a problem. And I think that I speak as a person who's worked closely with the Internet Engineering Task Force, the Internet Research Task Force, which I was a chair of, and worked, in very good cooperation with ICANN and with IANA and with IEEE. These are very important bodies to support and to participate in, even though there are competing bodies. But unique standards are extremely important. I think I'm going to leave it at that. There's lots of other terrible trends. Let me just say that I think the trend of censorship and manipulation of traffic is not just a content authorization problem, but also a problem of security and economic impact, because it's not only individuals, but also every body that we work with in the internet is subject to the impacts of the censorship technologies and steering technologies that we have. So we should try to think of it as not just about authorities versus those who authorize others, but also about authorities causing problems to other authorities. And in that situation, I think that's another very disturbing trend. So those are my two for now.
Thank you, Alison. I don't want to open up a new Pandora box, but I would like to probably follow up with a questions, because you talk about standards and also the organizations that work around the production and setting the standards. To what extent these, in your perception, these authorities, these organizations are still considered to be legitimate, or there are like a bunch of other realities that start to contest the work done by these organizations?
I want to be an optimist here, and say that there's many other ways that global agreement is reached on standards. For example, open source, which may have global open source is sometimes used in lieu of a standards development process. But in terms of the organizations which question the legitimacy, I think that our best bet, and one that we're good at, is to be pragmatic as engineers and say, where is the most engineering being done? Where are the details worked out? Where are we getting the right examples? And one of the great things that developed during during the maybe first, second decade of the internet was the ability for different organizations who had different bases of legitimacy, such as ITU, to say, I'm going to acknowledge this standard, which was developed by a different type of standards organization, such as the IETF. So liaisons between these organizations and the ability to recognize the work are very important. This is actually a very multi-stakeholder approach, in fact, where you may have different bases for authority for saying a global standard, but you can reference the standards from somebody who's done the engineering and who has working code. So optimistically, I think we can still do that. Pessimistically, there are many times when that model gets threatened. And that's another thing that I think the audience that we're working with, that we're talking to today, has a lot of influence on.
Thank you, Alison. Nice to hear from you that there is still a bit of optimism when it comes to these important and fundamental issues concerning the interoperability and the global internet. Benjamin, now back to you. What is your understanding of worrisome trends at the technological level when it comes to internet fragmentation?
Definitely find that the domain space problem, namespace problem, is a definite worry, and this is really going to in the how Ellen has put it very well, falling off the Empire State Building, the problem that if people don't turn around and look at it, it's going to be a huge issue. And actually, if we look at the policy space, this is not an area that a lot of people are actually looking at. If we look at all the policy scholarship that's going on, this is a problem. I'm just bringing the information right from the policy scholarship side, that people in the policy side are worried about more governance issues and more like how the commercial entities are controlling the space rather than the namespace issues, which I think is a more fundamental issue because it goes right down to the availability and the integrity of the internet. Whereas I'm not so worried about censorship.
I see. I got it. And I mean, this is an interesting point because I see like kind of two levels, like from what you're saying, like political side, more concerned to issues related to certain levels of or layers of the internet, whereas the more technical community much more focused on other issues more related to the kind of layers beneath the application one. Why do you think it's the case? Why governments remain to a certain level of intervention and do not go further down?
I think this is an age-old problem of the policy and technical communities not spending enough time with one another and basically having totally different ways of speaking that go across purposes sometimes. Quite honestly, if you send a diplomat to attend IETF, as I have, it's baffling, right? To a diplomat to sit in there and say, what on earth is going on, right? I'm grateful for at least I spent like part of my career in IT, so I can follow what we are discussing here. But many of my colleagues in the policy space, I'm barely holding on, guys. So they would.
So it's a matter of accessibility of certain topics, of certain issues.
Yes, and namespace is so fundamental that I think if we can translate it, then there'll be policy interest in it. But also the other thing is that between state to state, in terms of political contestation, they are more actually interested in content. They assume that the namespace is fine and you're not going to have the whole system crashing down. They're just battling it out about, I want my content to go into your country. I want my influence to be felt in your country. or I don't want your influence to come into my country. And I think that's actually a top of mind on the political level. And the only time they go down to the technical level is, wait, I see that some of the providers on the physical layer are actually coming from your country, and I don't trust you. So, then I start to get worried. So
So
that,
when it gets physical, basically, when
yeah,
it comes to like borders and territory, like
everything territory, yeah.
physical stuff, that's where you are mentioning, like you're claiming states get kind of
Yes,
concerned.
instead of thinking on the big picture, which namespace, I mean, the whole thing crashes around us. You're not going to be able to see anything at all, anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Benjamin, for your understanding, for your contribution. I saw Jaya appearing and now disappearing. I guess she has a problem with her internet connection. She's in a hotel, so let's hope she will be able to join a later stage, and then I will ask the questions all at once. But meanwhile, we can keep proceeding. We mentioned in certain in some of your answers, we touch upon the issues of security, and as you know, the project itself that I'm leading is on the impact and the consequences on cybersecurity when in case of internet fragmentation. So my next question is really about to understand, according to the trends that you identified, according to the knowledge you have on this issue, what could be the possible consequences on cybersecurity broadly and less true? Cybersecurity is another I wouldn't say contested concept, but may change according to who are you talking to. We can rely on the basic triad of cybersecurity. So, what are possible consequences in case of internet fragmentation? Of what are already the possible or like concrete realities of the ongoing internet fragmentation? Benjamin, would you like to give a start? You are muted.
Sorry, too many tabs
Yes.
open.
Okay. No.
And yeah, as you were saying, we can look at the usual definitions, right? So, for the sake of those kind of confidentiality, integrity, availability, and I I believe these are the key things we're concerned about. Availability seems to be the biggest concern that the whole system can go down. The integrity, the whether the data that we are receiving is accurate or complete, I think is the second order. But there are other risks, of course, which are not considered cybersecurity risks, like freedom of flow of information, freedom of trade, global cooperation, the connectivity. So I haven't considered those. I mean, those are, of course, valid considerations, but they're not, I think, classically considered cybersecurity problems.
Thank you, Benjamin. Maybe then with Alison or Alain, we can dive deeper in some of these aspects. Alain, would you give us your understanding of what can be possible cybersecurity implication of internet fragmentation?
So I'm going to go back to my namespace fragmentation issue. Let's say that I go to my bank website to do a wire transfer or something, and I type in www.mybank.com, right? How do I know I go to the right place? Well, there's all those things about like certificates, HTTPS, DNS security, and all of that. But fundamentally, if when I do the name resolution, mybank.com, I am sent to the wrong place, I have a major issue. So if we have alternative name systems that can potentially take me anywhere, not where I want, but somewhere else, That's a major cybersecurity issue. That's essentially what we call name collisions. And we see that every day when people are using my bank spelled slightly differently to try to, with some phishing attempt, to redirect me to my bank website. That's not my bank website. Now, if it is the infrastructure that is doing this underneath me without even me knowing it, there's a major, major security risk. And here, this is not about availability, because that thing seems to be available. It is that what I am getting or where I am getting is not where I think I am going to. And that, for me, is the main cyber risk associated with internet fragmentation. Now, there is another one also, which is more an operational one. So when people deal with cybersecurity in the namespace, which is a domain I'm more familiar with, there are always needs to take care of bad actors that register bad names, or that create botnets, they create all kinds of malware. And they are actions like takedowns that are being accomplished with the cooperation of law enforcement and all over. It's a system that currently works. If, again, we go into some alternative name systems where things cannot be deleted by design, it's a lot more complicated. So there's also a risk with some of those technologies that the bad actors could not be removed easily. Those are two risks that I wanted to highlight.
Thank you. Yeah, pretty worrisome one. And do you think that for the current state of the art and also for the current sort of role that you have, you are managing these worrisome trends?
So I'm a technologist. I'm not a policymaker. So what I do is I write papers on those different technologies. And so from the office of the CTO, we have a number of papers that we publish regularly, and that make some analysis of new technologies and try to look at what is the potential impact of those technologies on the security and stability of the internet. So that is my role, to try to raise awareness that sometimes there is a problem.
Yeah, maybe we can come back on possible solution later. Now I would like to give you the floor to Alison about her understanding of cybersecurity implication of interfragmentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to mention again the number space as a cybersecurity impact issue. If you when you have a cyber attack of some sort, it's extremely important that you you have sort of accurate routing to your resources. Actually, there's an interesting example that fits together where that was published in a recent Unix security about having using DNS names for sending around attacks signatures, and if they were not secured with DNSSEC, it would be possible to say this to change the result so that the signature is marked as not malware instead of malware. So there's lots of examples where your efforts to do cybersecurity are impacted by the fact that you don't have your namespace or your numbering space is a concern. If I'm working with another organization to try to deal with a DOS attack, but we can't actually accurately route to each other, or someone is messing with our routing, we can't actually handle the DOS attack well. So the ability to actually accomplish cybersecurity interventions depends on really strong, secure, and unique critical infrastructure. So that's one of the cyber implications. Another is that and that just brings me back to the idea of work together in security work together in organizations, work together technically, but also I agree with Benjamin, work together on policies. So one of the things that the IETF does, which is the organization I'm most familiar with, is put in place really strong security, which may need a legislative boost or which may need a policy boost in order to be actually used. And so an important thing is the coordination between the people who make policy and the people who make technology, where we can identify if you were to boost this, if you were to give this some support, it will protect a lot of things that you need to prevent cybersecurity problems, to keep the internet flowing for you. And finally, we haven't talked much about end-to-end encryption here, but there's lots of and I didn't mention the trend to want to break up end-to-end encryption because of the desire to surveil or to watch for problems in the streams. But even if you're just thinking about critical infrastructure again, if you don't have a really secure way to manage your critical infrastructure using very strong end-to-end security, if it is actually open to intervention by various parties, you can't really say that you have secure critical infrastructure. It's kind of the weakest link problem. So that is another area where we have to understand that there are risks for cybersecurity and security of the infrastructure because we aren't allowing an end-to-end capability, in this case end-to-end encryption, which we need to protect our operations as well as we need to protect our work and other things. So I'm happy that was a kind of a multiple parts answer, but hopefully hopefully it was clear enough.
No, absolutely, it was very clear, and actually, I wish we would have more time to dig into all the different aspects. I just want to, before trying to see if Jaya is with us. I don't know if you can hear me, Jaya.
I can hear you. I don't know if you
Finally.
can hear me.
Yes,
So,
yes, we can hear
yeah.
you.
Talk
I
about
guess
internet fragmentation. I was having issues connecting.
well, happy to finally having you here. I know that you have like some technical issues, so we might not probably be able to show your video, to share the video. If because I mean we already went through some questions. What is the definition of internet fragmentation? What are the trends that we see in terms of at the technical level? And now we got to the impact on cybersecurity. And Alison was also mentioning the issues with DDoS attack, and I guess this is a very good segue for introducing you and what you are doing. Jaya, you are the Chief Information Security Officer at Rapid7. So if you don't mind, before going to like the last round of questions, maybe concerning what can be the possible solutions to the problems that we identified during this event, I can give you the floor, and maybe you can give us a short overview of what is your understanding of internet fragmentation, what are the trends that you see, and also the cybersecurity implication before wrapping up with the last questions. You send me the PowerPoint because I'm sure you won't be able to share from where you are. Let me put them on the screen.
Samuel, if it doesn't work, because I sent you a download link.
Yes,
I
received it. I see it.
Yeah,
So,
there's a very large embedded video which we don't need to show.
okay.
So I was just trying to show, because I pulled from NetScout to like today's picture at a certain amount of time about which current DDoSes were running and where they were geographically positioned. So what perhaps I could say in terms of current trends, which is
You can
again,
guide me through the slide. Do you see them?
I am not seeing them. Hold on a second. Why am I not seeing them?
Do you, Alison?
Yes, now I see them.
You
I
see
see them.
the?
I see them.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Okay. You can guide me through
Okay.
the slides.
Well, if we go to the first slide, so slide 2 already,
Yes.
then what I was trying to show you here, and you can, if you can click play, Daniele, in the background. Yes. So you just see this is from today's just, traffic. And I just wanted to show you that we can go to the Arbor Atlas map. Arbor was acquired by NetScout. And so you see all of the devices that are doing anti-DDoS, and you have a kind of real-time view of the different countries that are being attacked. And bottom line, everyone's attacking everyone else. And it's a continuous thing. And this is one of the reasons why there are needs for the original splinternet. So the banking industry back in 2013 experienced such heavy DDoSes in the country of the Netherlands, which is actually a big fan of anti-fragmentation, but several proponents in the Dutch government and across the country and in the banking sector wanted to actually have a splinter net in the Netherlands and call it like the Netherlands net to basically, in times of DDoS or severe issues from the rest of world, they wanted to only be able to have connectivity within the Netherlands itself and not have to deal with all of the garbage coming at them at the rest of the world. If we go to slide 3 really quickly. And
Yes.
unfortunately, since 2013, when that attack happened, it's far from going away. We keep seeing trends. There was February of this year, claimed to be the largest DDoS ever. Then we saw the last one as early as last week, which is, again, a reset attack on HTTP2, which is, again, claiming to be the largest DDoS ever with impact to Google, Cloudflare, Amazon. So all of the major internet providers and people who normally are able to deflect these attacks insofar as they provide services to other global customers to help them with anti-DDoS services themselves, they are seeing huge issues. And if we go to the next slide. So the trends are, bottom line, that it keeps going. And if that's the trends, then the implications, arguably, for security, the reason that it's so bad, the first thing is all of the DDoS stuff. You've probably already discussed this, but this is one of the stupidest attacks there are. It's not an enormous amount of skills that you need in order to do a DDoS. The skill set now is really about doing some of these layer 7 attacks, and the complexity that is currently required in understanding the latest types of vulnerabilities you can exploit in order to have a successful attack. And because these attacks, once that vulnerability or initial vector in order to have these layer 7 attacks is found, they're being run as a service, which means that you might have a couple of smart people or engineers that originally found the problem, but then subsequently it's given through the strata of affiliates and provided as a service for relatively little money. And it's integrated by folks who basically make money off of this by providing packages and services for as little as $900 a month to have incredibly successful attack activity. And, the issue is, of course, that we know that in participating in these attacks are those vulnerable systems that will be able to do this, but also compromised Internet of Things systems, whether it's your internet connected blender or more commonly your internet connected home router, which is where we're seeing the majority of vulnerabilities. All of those devices are still unfortunately playing a part in global DDoS botnets that are providing the infrastructure in order to launch the attacks. The attacks from a cybersecurity perspective that are the most worrying are those that happen against critical infra. And we also see these kinds of attacks as part of multi-layered attacks that also involve ransomware. It's all these types of multi-layered extortion attacks, and they're levied against banks, electricity companies during cyber conflicts or against those different parties in the conflict, and takedown, which we've been doing, it feels like, forever. So on the right-hand side, is a snapshot from Europol, which every once in a while has a crackdown against these DDoS services. But unfortunately today, you can right now, if you go into any browser, type the words booter or stressor and still find a whole bunch, a plethora of your regionally servicing DDoS services, which you can also buy for this amount of money. So this is not difficult. This is not something you have to hunt for on the dark web. This is something your teenage child can launch against their school system in order to avoid exams at the end of the year. And if we go to, is it okay to go to solutions? Samuele?
Well, before maybe go to the solution, I would like to have it's worrisome. It's really surprising that how still easy it is to launch this kind of attacks. But when it comes to internet fragmentation, for a company like yours that works with the clients throughout the world, what would be the implications for providing the same services in a fragmented internet?
Again, I think that for me, it's actually not an option. So when the Netherlands wanted to introduce it, look, most security people, when they see things like this, when they see foundational problems that are actually breaking the fabric of the very thing we're trying to protect, usually wind up starting with just saying no. But then subsequently realizing that it's not actually an answer and you have to provide another solution. So when the Netherlands wanted to do this splinternet, and I was not the CISO of Rapid7, but of KPN Telecom, which is a telecommunications provider in the Netherlands, we basically had to find other solutions. And I think that that has got to be the way that we look forward. You cannot completely not empathize with the types of problems they're seeing, which is why they want to fragment in the first place. There were concerns that the internet, of course, is not reliable, that there's too much interception and other issues, not even talking about DDoS as a foundational problem, but all of the other things that just come with being part of a global community. There's a lot of problems with the signal to noise ratio in some of that communication. So it's really about how do we figure out, how do we get back to an optimum state? And again, it seems crazy to me that in order to protect the connectivity, what we're going to do is cut off a vital artery of all of our information. It seems completely nonsensical, but that is indeed what I think foundationally fragmentation means in this example.
Thank you. And there was another question that I was asking to all the other panelists at the beginning of the event, which was like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like the most fragmentation possible that we have on in the internet, meaning different networks that are not able to communicate to each other, and 1 being the all good days of the internet as it was funded with all the principle of global outreach and inclusivity. To what extent on this scale would you posit the current state of affairs in the internet in terms of internet fragmentation at the technical level?
So I think there's one thing of fragmentation when it's systemic. I think there's also a worrying trend of governments to self-isolate in times of crisis simply by, turning off BGP, just turning off internet connectivity. That is much more an ad hoc issue of not having an entire country be reachable anymore. Those are issues that I really think are much more problematic. And I think that if you have in some of these countries, like it is the example of when Egypt turned off their routing infrastructure for the country of so I think there are some very specific examples that we can point to saying clearly this is not desirable. I just wonder what that means in terms of resilience if we have critical pieces of infrastructure that other parts of the internet also rely on some of these countries. So I think that's a bigger problem. So if we have other countries where, I don't know, there's a root server in one of these countries where there's an authoritative government that decides to turn off access, that then you have real issues.
Okay, thank you. And so we are about to open the floor for questions. So last questions, we can stay with you so that then I can close the slides. Possible solutions to all the issues that we talk about so far. And so we go for a roundtable and we start again from you, Jaya.
Okay, so if we go to the last slide 5. So I think obviously the solution is not to have these splinter networks. And I think that first and foremost, for DDoS specifically, it's to use anti-DDoS signature-based detection tools, whether that's directly from Arbor Atlas or buying a service from Cloudflare, Amazon, et cetera. Pick your poison. But I think the idea is that you would already have this notion of having a solution against these things. So not saying no splinternet, but hey, here's what you could potentially do, making sure that standards implementation, whether that's the manners standard from the Internet Society or just a subset of BCP38, which prevents spoofing of some of this traffic. I think we really need foundational and cross border or cross company, of all the institutions actually implementing BCP38 went online. And then one of the things that really bothered me is that when we take a look at solving this problem, we try to solve it when it gets to its destination. So all of this evil traffic is going across the internet, and we try to stop it when it actually gets to its destination. And I think we need to get better at trying to block it at origin. We can do that, by the way, because we can. By the way, Samuel, could you put it in slideshow mode for just this slide?
Yes.
Just this slide alone. Just that last slide, because I had two embedded things in there. Oh, yep. If you go one back. If you just go back click, then yeah, there you go. So the first thing, the first thing is the DDoS DB, which allows you to collect, it's a database. It allows you to collect information about the attacks. So if you do this, you can actually put all of that information together in order to understand where the attack's actually coming from. And if you click next, the click again, then the idea is you can integrate this database into a concept of a DDoS clearinghouse, which means that you can identify and fingerprint where all of the traffic is coming from in that database, and then have a way to actually be able to fingerprint these attacks and provide them to everyone who would need it. And it actually helps you extend the knowledge that's there about all of this different type of traffic by having those fingerprints readily available in addition to your signature-based detections that are coming from Arbor. And I think that this is something that would actually work. And just to be clear, it's a combination. So blocking traffic at origin rather than destination means that telecom providers and internet service providers will need to work together to understand their peering and transit relationships in order to know where that source traffic is coming from, so they can talk to their peering party to block that traffic. So everybody knows when they receive traffic from their partner organizations where they are getting it from, and then that organization can further trace it to their downstream. And in doing so, we can actually try to eradicate a lot of the malicious traffic out there on the internet. It'll be slow going initially, but I believe that this is the way.
Yeah,
so
thank you, Jaya. It's like also doing a bit of due diligence, if I may say so. I'm sorry we have to wrap up quite soon. So a last tour de table concerning possible solution for the problems that we identified. Alison, would you give us your ideas on this?
One of the ones that I think is very important that reflects some of the things that Jaya just said is that in any region, you should encourage open IXPs, Internet Exchange Points, because the presence of many different providers and many different ISPs and the peering complex, very large amounts of peering is one of the things that helps us a great deal with robustness, even against some of the DDoS attacks. So that's something which PCH spends a lot of time on, and I would be very remiss if I didn't say everybody should spend a lot of time on that, encouraging and helping to support open IXPs. And then, going back again to making sure that we support standardization and global cooperation bodies. And I'll say again that for example, different kinds of regulatory or other bodies can ask that vendors provide equipment with a default that supports, say, BCP38, or that supports routing security, and makes it hard, you have to deliberately turn it off if you decide to not be part of that. So that would be a nice default towards infrastructure protective security. And if necessary, that may need policies to help us do that. I have lots of other thoughts about this, but I also am mindful of the time. So let me let my colleagues also participate, and I'll stop with those two.
Thank you, Alison. Benjamin, would you like to come in?
This is brilliant. I'm learning so much tonight. Thank you so much to Jaya, to Ellen, to Alison. The only thing I can add, I agree with everything you're saying, and I really feel that we need to be able to translate this to the policymakers. And Alison, you said regulate the vendors' policy to drive it. I really think that's really important. We need to be able to get more regulators to understand the problem, get more policymakers to get behind putting out the policies that are going to create the good behavior, the good solutions, that so that resources are put towards this and energies are spent on doing the right thing.
Samuel, we lost your audio.
Sorry, yes, I was I was muted. Sorry, still didn't learn how to use these platforms. Alain, over to you. Thank you. Meanwhile, I invite attendees if they have any questions to write in the chat or to raise their virtual hands, because we will open the Q&A session soon after this. Thank you.
So I would like to go back to a point that Alison made earlier, which is the value of the unicity of some of the critical elements, like the namespace, the addressing space, the protocols. This is a really important piece in the construction of the internet. And we need to remember one thing is that all those standards, they are elective standards. There's not some place that says you must use actually this version of IP or this version of BGP or this version of DNS. There's no such thing. It is being used because it works and because people find value in using it. And as long as people find more value in being together than being separate, then we will keep the internet as a whole thing. If people start to believe that they have more potential by being isolated, then we will have definitely a fragmented internet. So let's stay together.
Thank you very much, Ellen, also for this last message. I saw that the chat has been quite active throughout the event. In particular, I don't see like questions per se, but like different messages. One also refers to we need to implement resilient infrastructures in cybersecurity. For example, like sandboxing, we can minimize the risk posed by cyber attacks. I don't know, maybe if you can comment on this, Jaya. I don't know if you would like to add something here. I guess it also refers to the air gap sort of solutions.
But I think that air gapping is much more a local network issue and not something really scalable across internet infrastructure. So I understand, sandboxing or containerization, but that's like much more from a host systems perspective and not really from a network-wide perspective. It's not useful enough for us to be able to scale across the fabric of the internet. And definitely useful to protect certain systems, but I think it's about making sure that availability of everything else is there and that no one can voluntarily disconnect parts of the DNS routing infrastructure or BGP infrastructure or something else that we all depend on.
Thank you. And actually, this is something that I was discussing with another expert in one of the interviews that I had for this project, and we were discussing the fact that so far we have like one big global internet, and in case there are issues that emerge, maybe like vulnerabilities or things that have to be patched or things that don't work very well, we do have an entire community of experts and practitioners, and which you are part of, being able to intervene and cooperate, as Alison was also mentioning, like the importance of having a sort of being recognized by others as a valuable partner in making the internet working. In case we get to the level 10 of the fragmentation, meaning we will have like different internets with different root names in different regions of the world. How does the support for these networks would work? Would this means that the current multi-stakeholder community would have to change, or would be still possible to provide support, or something even at the governance level would need to change? And this is an open question to all of you. I don't know if Alison, would you like to have a first say on this?
I have a concern that if we don't take the measures that slow down and prevent fragmentation, including giving people better tools so they don't feel as motivated to fragment, I thought that was a really good point by Jaya, then we can cascade to a point where those who cooperate are game theoretically in a bad position in relation to those who don't, because those who continue to have an open internet with open standards can be reached by those who've walled themselves off, and it becomes a way for it to be easier to launch attacks. I mean, it's easy to launch attacks from anywhere, but there are certain places that are notable for being very good at launching attacks while also being closed internets, like North Korea. And if that were to increase, if we get to level 10, it may be very difficult to come back from that. I'm always an optimist. We started from extreme fragmentation and made an unfragmented communications network through a variety of mechanisms that are many of them technical, some of them regulatory or policy, talking about how the internet formed originally. But I think in the world where there's many bad actors, it may be much harder to do that than it was 50 years ago.
And I would like to follow up on this because, yes, you mentioned about how internet was at the outset and how we managed to pass from different sort of networks to one big networks. And my question now is for Alain. One of your answers, you mentioned that for a period of time there were different protocols working together at the same time, and you managed to make them working. So, I mean, fragmentation itself is nothing new. As also Alison mentioned, there were periods where we were already fragmented. What worked well in terms of managing these different protocols to converge and to work together?
Well, I would somehow ask the other question around, if I may, is what essentially moved us toward converging to one protocol? And I would say that is the economy of scale. Because if you are an ISP, then you can buy your product from vendor A, vendor B, and vendor C. They implement the same standards. If you're a vendor, you can sell your stuff to ISP A, ISP B, ISP C. So you do one line of products. There might be slight variations, but you're essentially one line of products. And same thing for all the different tools that are being developed to operate the internet. You develop one tool, it can work everywhere. That economy of scale is what was, in my opinion, the driving force toward converging toward one internet. And as long as we keep this, then, as I mentioned earlier, people will have more interest into staying together. Example, if you develop your own version of IP, new IP or whatever it is, then you will be alone to develop all the product, test all the product, debug them, teach people how to use it. This is a huge, huge hurdle. The barrier is really, really high. As even when we try to migrate from IPv4 to IPv6, it was a worldwide cooperation, and still 30 years later, we're still not there, even though a lot of people did cooperate together. So if you go to a brand new thing, completely independent, then you are contemplating a really, really long and expensive period of time.
Thank you, Len. Jaya and Benjamin, would you like to jump in for a last, like 30-second answer on this?
Just to build on what Ellen said, and let's also think of economies of scale can be disrupted when some of these potentially fragmenting technologies are actually being promoted by large states or large blocks which have a financial backing and who can actually provide subsidies or provide this to developing countries at a lower cost, and then they can push this out to a broader scale, creating their own economy of scale. So that is something that we also need to be careful about, not just, because not all countries are equal when it comes to adopting technology.
Absolutely. Jaya, last few words.
Yes, I think that we need to get away from the whole prisoner's dilemma, because I completely agree with Allison here, but I think that this prisoner's dilemma mentality is what's holding us back. We need to replace it with another type of game theory, which is interdependence theory, because it far better reflects the scale and scope of activities we do on the internet, which is less about benefit and cost, but more understanding that an impact on one is an impact on all, and that we have large ripple effects in this interconnected system.
Thank you all also for your last kind of wish. I hope that there are going to be more actions and consequences on these again words. I thank you very much for this very interesting conversation, very insightful, very important for the project we are conducting at UNIDIR. We will come back soon with a report tackling internet fragmentation from a cybersecurity perspective that will be published hopefully by the end of this year. And I want to thank you again for spending the time with us, sharing your important knowledge. And I invite you to remain to check time to time the UNIDIR website, what we are doing, our publication, our event. I'm sure you can find some other stuff that we do still very interesting. And with this, I really want to wrap up now. I don't see any other questions. So thank you again to all of you. And I wish you a good rest of the day or a good night for in case you are on the other side of the world, as Jaya and Benjamin, I think, are. I don't want to keep you awake so much again. Thank you again, and stay soon.